Good afternoon. Welcome to European Chats. My name is Maja Bobic and I will be moderating today's discussion. European Chats were launched a couple of years ago with the intention to gather European movement members, activists and stakeholders in a discussion about all the issues that were surrounding COVID crisis. We, of course, also want to debate wider European issues and issues that are pertaining to the future of Europe. Today, we have with us Mr. Andrew Adonis, who is chair of the European Movement UK. Thank you very much for joining us. And we have Raphael, Secretary General of the European Movement Switzerland. So I want to kick off this discussion. I mentioned COVID crisis, but of course, and unfortunately, we have another crisis, war in Ukraine and Putin's Russia invasion on the sovereign and neighboring country that is happening in the last couple of weeks. We were wondering, from the beginning, we can have your thoughts about how is UK and Switzerland, respectively, being affected by COVID crisis and Ukrainian war, especially having in mind that you are being outside the EU. Mr. Adonis, can I start with you with this question?
Thank you. It's great to be with you, and it's great to be doing this partnership meeting with European Movement in Switzerland. And I really look forward to what Raphael is going to say to us from Bern. I'm speaking from London, from my office in the House of Lords, which is the second chamber, the upper chamber of the UK Parliament. And like as with our friends in Switzerland and across Europe, we're preoccupied at the moment by a really serious European crisis. The first major invasion of a European state from outside since 1945, and maybe Georgia and Ukraine in 2014 a precedent, but neither of those were on the scale of what we've seen in the last 2 weeks. Street by street fighting and shelling, which is reminiscent of the Second World War, which many of us had never thought that we would see again. A kind of, I mean, to put it bluntly, fascist dictator who is playing fast and loose with international law and human rights, including the first article of the Nuremberg trial, which was the waging of aggressive war without cause, which again we'd never thought that we'd see again, and a massive refugee crisis, which could potentially, unless this war is ended soon, lead to millions of Ukrainians being forced to leave their own country, and then all of us across Europe will have to cope with that crisis too. So it's a very, very somber moment, and coming after the COVID crisis, which preoccupied us for the previous 2 years, it's been a grim few years. And we are, I mean, the first message I want to say is one of solidarity. We are, in a fundamental sense, all in this together. We're all Europeans, regardless of whether we're in the European Union or not, whether we're in NATO or not. And of course, Switzerland is in neither. European values, European democracy, the whole future of the continent as a peaceful and prosperous continent is at stake in this great crisis. And just as we in Britain realise it, and despite Brexit, are absolutely foursquare behind the European efforts to resist Putin, and we've been at the forefront, particularly of the NATO military interventions to support the Ukrainian resistance, so too we've been very pleased to see that Switzerland has been putting its shoulder to the wheel as well. And my understanding of it, Raphael will say more in a moment, is that the sanctions which have been imposed on Russian assets and regime assets in Switzerland over the last week are without precedent in Swiss history, which is a sign of how serious a breach of European values and security is at stake, and how serious you in Switzerland regard this issue, as do we in Britain. I just want to say two other things in respect of COVID and the COVID crisis. The big long run issue, of course, is the reconstruction of Europe after COVID. We all took a massive economic and social hit in respect of COVID. And the question is how we rebuild and how we build back better and see that we can get our economies back on an even keel again. We can get growth back again. We can reduce unemployment, and we can stimulate prosperity. And just as we followed similar policies, actually, in the lockdowns, we all had furlough schemes of some kind or another, strong state-supported interventions to maintain people's jobs and lifestyles. So I think we're going to have to be following much the same policies as we come out of COVID. And I think that applies whether we're in the European Union or not. Like the growth and prosperity funds that the European Union has done, which are EU funds, are being replicated pretty similarly by the kind of efforts that we're making here in the UK too. And we could have a discussion about precise interventions in the question and answer afterwards, but I don't see that there's a huge difference between them. The issue which, of course, both COVID, but much more strikingly Ukraine bring out is the relationship which both of us have, both the United Kingdom and Switzerland have with the European Union. And both of us have an unusual relationship with the European Union. We in Britain have been in and out. We weren't in at the beginning. We went in after a painful process of adjustment and negotiation in the 1970s. Many of us thought that we would be then in forever. But in fact, by a narrow majority, we voted to leave 6 years ago, and that has now taken effect. The European movement in Britain, as part of the European Movement International, wants us to rejoin. And opinion polls in Britain show that there's majority support for getting steadily closer to the EU again. A majority think that Brexit was a mistake, and it's my view that if we were to revisit the issue of rejoining, probably after re-entering the customs union and the single market, that could well happen in the next period. It's hard to define what that period is, but it could well happen. So the issue of British membership of the European Union is very, very far from resolved. And those of us who are in the strong pro-European part of the debate in Britain are day in, day out pointing out the weaknesses of the Brexit deal, how it's harming our economy, how it's reducing life chances and opportunities for young people and traders and others who are used to being part of the single market and the customs union, and what we need to do about it. But we have to face the fact that Britain has always had a semi-detached relationship with the European Union, even when we were in it, and that reflects an imperial past and a separateness from the European continent. You know, this channel and Britain never having been invaded since the 11th century by European armies has instilled a kind of separatist mentality, which has always been at variance with the more federalist mentality of many of our continental friends, and I think will continue to be whether we're in or out of the EU. But I hope, as I say, we can get steadily closer to it and back again. Now, in some ways, that has been reflected in the relationship between Switzerland and the EU, as I see it. There's a big, big difference. We're an island. You're not an island. You're integrally connected with Europe. We have an imperial and a very martial past. We still thought our politicians a victory in the Second World War over Germany and so on, which is very different from Switzerland, whose past relationship with Europe has been marked by neutrality rather than imperialism. But the result of both and of course, we're a bedrock of NATO and the largest, highest spending NATO member in Europe, and of course, Switzerland isn't a part of it. So though there are very marked differences, which we can discuss, they've produced a relationship with the EU, which isn't a million miles apart by the very different routes that we've got there, which is a semi-detached relationship, a strong trading relationship with the EU, which will continue in our case post-Brexit, and we're an exporting and importing nation almost as much as Switzerland is, but without being fully integrated in the EU and with a constantly dynamic changing relationship thereby. We've observed closely, particularly those of us who are looking at how Britain might get back into the EU, a very problematic relationship with the single market, your 2 referendums that you've held in the last 8 or 9 years on freedom of movement and the compatibility of freedom of movement with the single market, and the very uneasy compromises that you've reached with the EU on those issues. And to be frank, our relationship with the EU has been marred by similar uneasiness about the level of integration, including freedom of movement, because free immigration from the European continent was a very major factor in our referendum in 2016. And I think but for the scale of immigration from Central and Eastern Europe, we probably wouldn't have lost the referendum in 2016. And so not only do we have a similar in some ways similar situation to Switzerland, but we are observing very closely and learning very closely from your experience. I think I've said enough. My final remark is simply to say that we have a profound friendship with the people of Switzerland, and the solidarity that I think is going to be really strongly reinforced by this Ukrainian crisis over quite a short period of time, I think will lead to a strong reinforcement of pro-European feeling in Britain. And it's always been my view that the most likely scenario for Britain actually to re-enter the European Union was probably going to be the short-run effect of a major crisis, not the long-run effect of compound economic decline. And we've already seen the first very major crisis in Ukraine. And I think the lesson of this for pro-Europeans in Britain is that we need to get closer to the EU. We need to align NATO and the EU very closely so that the economic and the security elements of our European family are brought together. And in a world where we have fascist dictators back again who are breaching international borders, shelling European cities and creating millions of refugees, not only should we not be complacent, but we need to be highly active and be prepared to be much bolder and much more forthright in defense of European values and our European civilization than maybe we have been in recent years. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Indeed, and unfortunately, both your countries and European Union would be much more stronger economically, militarily, and in other respects if we were integrated. And as you were mentioning some of the issues for the UK, I just remembered that next year would be 50 years of membership of the UK if it were to stay in the European Union. So instead of celebrating half of the century, we are in fact discussing maybe the possibility of the reintegration in the short or medium or the long run. Raphael, before you maybe want to comment also on some of the things that Andrew mentioned in the specifics of the relationships and the similarities between the two countries and the problems and issues you face, I want also to address you this question: how is Switzerland experiencing both COVID crisis and war in Ukraine, and especially having in mind this negative connotation, which I really do not like, not being a non-EU country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thanks also from my side for the invitation and for the opportunity to discuss also with the European Movement UK. It's a pleasure to be here with you today, and thanks Andrew for these remarks, especially the very last sentences, which I fully support. We'll maybe get back to that in a few minutes. Yeah, it's a crazy time. It was quite an unbelievable 2 years, and now war has returned in Europe. It's maybe too early to already see the impact on the perception of Europe, of the EU in Switzerland, due to these two major crises. But I'll try to mention a few things regarding Ukraine. Andrew mentioned Switzerland is not an island. We are in the middle of Europe. There is no other thing than just showing solidarity and support to the Ukrainian people. It was interesting, and we got engaged also to make that message clear. It was a bit of a strange situation. I think it was last week or 2 weeks before, when the government, the Federal Council in Switzerland communicated with the press conference for the first time on the situation in Ukraine. they did it quite, it's my opinion, quite badly. It wasn't that clear at all where Switzerland was standing. Andrew mentioned Switzerland is known for its neutrality tradition, and somehow, but again, it's an unprecedented situation, so it's maybe also difficult for it was maybe also difficult for them to see and to sense what should we do now, but nevertheless it wasn't that clear where the country Switzerland was standing during the days that followed. The EU I guess also made clear that regarding sanctions, they were expecting that Switzerland would support them as well in the public debate in Switzerland. Also in the media, it was also clear that what the government has communicated wasn't what was expected at all. We are a European country. We share the European values and principles. We have to be solidar and take up and implement the sanctions that the EU countries very swiftly have decided to take. So they corrected their communication on the Monday, which was a very good thing. And now we are fully supporting EU's sanction, which is an obvious good choice. We sense, or I sense in these days, something shifting regarding also the discourse, the debate on neutrality in Switzerland. And in this regard, what's happening in Ukraine, in Europe, may have real and big consequences as well on our national policies regarding security, defense in Europe. But we'll see. I hope that we'll be able to take out this message of we are together, we are in this together as Europeans, as Europeans in Switzerland. That's my hope in this context. And last point regarding COVID, it was a dramatic crisis as well. Switzerland tried, or the government tried to follow a thin line of not asking for too strict measure of confinement restrictions. It was a tricky situation regarding also to the direct democracy we have in Switzerland. We had to vote a few times on these measures due to referendums. It was a difficult time, but regarding the European dimension, it wasn't as impactful as what we are seeing now. Exactly. So we'll see how it goes. But in both cases, we saw a European Union that in a few days, weeks, months, just dramatically evolved, got more integrated, took measures that weren't expected at all, and this new reality has not yet came down to the people in Switzerland, I would say. That's what we are working on right now, to try to show that today's EU, since especially COVID and now even more, is a different EU than the one that most of the people in Switzerland have in mind, the EU from 15, 20 years ago. yeah, maybe very briefly those remarks to start.
Thanks. And if I may follow up on that, because that's what I wanted to ask you. You said that people still did not realize and do not comprehend this new reality and the new European Union that is happening. But what is the public opinion? And do you see, maybe if you have followed this, some shifts as a result, maybe not of the EU response to Ukraine war, but maybe EU response to COVID crisis? Do you see some shifts in Swiss public opinion that would support or more integration or cooperation with the EU, or is it the same?
It's a good question. We haven't seen yet big shifts in this regard. Maybe it will come in a few weeks, months. But the situation in Switzerland, the starting point in this regard is quite different also in comparison to the UK. There is a big full membership, the EU accession, which we are pushing for, is not at all for now something we are discussing. I think the connections, and that's maybe the big problem, the connections between the new reality, what the EU is becoming, and the strict bilateral institutional relations between the EU and Switzerland, the connection between those two things are not yet made, even on, and that's a big issue, even on the level of the government. So we lack on this level, my opinion, again, the evaluation that we are in this together, and we cannot anymore at all want to cherry pick and expect from the EU to craft us when it comes to bilateral relations a special structure model. The time has come to just be part of it, and I hope this message will go down to everybody, or a majority of the people in Switzerland. But it will take time. It will take time.
Definitely, and your work is very important in that respect. If I may, Andrew, if I may also ask you, you mentioned that majority of the public opinion realizes that maybe Brexit was a mistake. And we also heard from colleagues from UK movement that there are some differences between different demographies in the public opinion when it comes to the attitudes towards the EU. Can you tell us what is the state of the public opinion at the moment, and what are the differences maybe between different demographies? Because I think youth was, like also during the referendum, prominently more in favor than the rest of the population.
Well, public opinion is complex on the issue of Europe at the moment. All of the following are true. We have a government that is resolutely committed to Brexit, and that isn't going to change. We have an opposition which has been deeply scarred by the Brexit battles and the fact that the present government won the last election, and therefore doesn't want to talk about Brexit. So there's a kind of conspiracy between the governing party and the main opposition party, our Labour Party, not to talk about Brexit at all. Meanwhile, in the real economy, Brexit is going very badly and causing real economic dislocation that traders and the public notice. And although there's not much political expression given to it, apart actually from people like me and pro-European campaigners, and I straddle, I'm a parliamentarian as well as a pro-European campaigner, so these views are made known in Parliament and the media, but not very strongly because of the position of the two major parties. The public themselves repeatedly tell opinion pollsters that they think that Brexit was a mistake, and that they want us to have a closer relationship with the EU. And indeed, in the last poll of public opinion, a quarter, 1 in 4 voters, not only said that Brexit was a mistake, but said that they would favour rejoining the European Union as soon as possible. And I have little doubt that if we had a government that was prepared to negotiate a much closer economic relationship with the EU, akin to Switzerland, so broadly part of the single market and the customs union, that the public would go along with that because they would take the lead from the government. So I don't think you'd even need a referendum for that. Because under our constitution, referendums are only held at the discretion of the government and parliament anyway. And so if a government and parliament were to agree to a much closer relationship with the European Union, I suspect that could be done without any referendum at all. So it's a complicated situation. It is at one and the same time, we are resolutely out of the EU. We have what we call in England a hard Brexit, out of the customs union, out of the single market. So much more detached economically from the EU than you are in Switzerland, and yet that isn't what the evidence of the public and their views, that isn't the evidence of what they actually want. And I think that that's why this relationship between Britain and the EU is going to be highly dynamic over the next 5-10 years. And I think the Ukraine crisis, where we've been basically shoulder to shoulder with our President Macron, Chancellor Scholz, and of course also with President Biden, and this American administration is a strong supporter of the European Union. I think it's a dynamic situation, and it could change quite rapidly.
Thank you very much, Raphael. I wanted to ask you, in the light of the COVID crisis, but also your priorities as a European movement, Switzerland. What are you doing? What are kind of actions, advocacy initiatives you're putting forward at the moment? What do you think is the most important issue to address currently?
Right now, we are very much trying to push this message of together, with the slogan, the European movement, if I'm not mistaken, also uses together for Europe, that we are in this together. It's not just what's happening in Ukraine. The war in Ukraine is not just a war between Russia and Ukraine. It's an attack to Europe, its values, its principles. So we are trying to spread this message in Switzerland, to also put in context the discussion we are having since years about the bilateral institutional relations, trying to say we see right now how much we are on the same boat. Just it's time to rethink completely and stop with this bilateral one in front of the other, and just start with the we are one next to the other. So that's basically what we are working on right now. But we also have to continue to monitor and follow the discussions regarding these institutional relations. In May last year, the government ended the negotiation on a framework agreement unilaterally. And now basically we have no clue how to move forward. End of February, the government and the timing was very bad because the war in Ukraine just started. Then also communicated on its thoughts regarding the next steps. So we have to follow these discussions. Our position on that is to say, look, guys, in Europe, 30 countries either are member of the European Union or member of the and I lost the economic area. So let's look at that. Let's look at one of these two models. We don't want to get something that is less good than what we have now. So we are working on these tracks through campaigning actions, events organized locally. Now again physically, but we in the last 2 years organized a few ones online, and trying to bring this European perspective in the discussions in Switzerland, and break the way we often think, very focused on ourselves. Yeah.
Great, thank you. We will be definitely cooperating also during the Europe Day.
Yes,
Unfortunately,
please.
Andrew, I wanted to ask you, we know European Movement United Kingdom is really very active in campaigning for different issues. What is on the top of your agenda? What kind of advocacy and projects are you pursuing at the moment?
Well, we've got a lot of campaigning around our theme. Raphael just said that your theme is Together for Europe. Our theme has been step by step towards rejoin. That's been our theme, which of course has a very British context to it. However, everything has been swept aside by Ukraine at the moment, and all of the focus of the European movement, including our events, and the whole Europe debate in Britain is now via Ukraine, both the immediate crisis, which is very great and continuing and may well deepen in terms of the actual war, the refugee crisis, where at the moment Britain has made big commitments but actually done very little, and this has become a very big issue. Prime Minister Boris Johnson has said that we're prepared to take hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian refugees, but only about 100 visas have yet been granted. And because of this congenital concern that our government has about asylum seekers, they're really in a very, very difficult position at the moment about wanting, in principle, to take a larger number of Ukrainian refugees, but not wanting to open up any avenues that might lead non-Ukrainians to start applying for asylum. I'd be very, very interested to know from Raphael about how the refugee issue is playing in Switzerland. What is Switzerland doing on refugees? What has been the public response to it? And what sort of numbers that you're talking about? And then the third issue, of course, is the geostrategic issue, which is starting to be debated, which is that maybe divorcing ourselves from our continent wasn't such a good idea if we're subject to external attack from a fascist dictator in Putin. Now, of course, the thing about Britain is that we only half divorced ourselves from our continent. We left the European Union, but we never left NATO. And one of the interesting and slightly paradoxical things about Brexit is that nobody who was supporting Brexit supported leaving NATO, even though actually the level of integration involved in NATO with the Article 5 guarantee for complete mutual military support is in some ways greater than any commitment that we gave under the EU. And indeed, ironically further, the strongest supporters of NATO, because they're the strongest support of our military, are on the right politically, though people like me in the left and centre, of course, are very strong supporters of NATO. But we don't fetishize defence and armies and all of that in the way that many of my friends on the right of politics do, because they really believe and fetishize military matters. And they, of course, are the strongest supporters of higher defence spending and therefore more integration with NATO. So the geostrategic issue in Britain is very interesting, that the very people who are propagating Brexit are the ones most passionate about standing up to Putin's Russia militarily. I mean, we're all passionate about standing up to it to see that Russia is evicted, but they have a particular focus on the military side. And I think that the political consequences of that will tend towards ending peak Brexit. I think we're now past peak Brexit and getting into a much more nuanced debate, including with the right of and the Conservative Party in our country about what relationship we have with the European Union, not whether we have a relationship which is close with the European Union. I mean, to be more precise, what close relationship we have with the European Union, because obviously we're always going to have a relationship with the European Union. I think as a result of Ukraine, the debate will become much more what close relationship are we going to have with the European Union, rather than whether we should have a close relationship with the European Union, which many Brexiters, including people running this present government and Boris Johnson, had denied before Ukraine.
Right. Well, hopefully, European Movement United Kingdom will be able also to influence the debate about and that's what we are looking forward. Raphael, if you want to just quickly respond or respond and comment about the Swiss response to the humanitarian aspects and crisis of the aspect of the Ukraine war, please.
Yeah, sure. No, we very much welcomed the position of our government in this regard, because there as well they aligned or tried to do so as much as they could on the EU's position. The government decided to activate a special status permits for people fleeing the war in Ukraine to guarantee them protection. They for now, if I'm not mistaken, we a few hundreds maybe came in Switzerland through contacts they had. So the authorities are preparing themselves to welcome more people in the coming days, weeks. But in this regard, it's quite a positive solidarity movement which is going on. And also in the public opinion, we see that that people are very much open to welcome, even in their homes, to welcome people fleeing Ukraine. It's always a bit tricky situation. Some are criticizing the fact that now when they are Europeans fleeing, needing protection, we are welcoming them without restrictions or almost in comparison to people fleeing Syria, for example. But that's maybe another debate. So in this regard, on the economic sanctions side and on the humanitarian side, Switzerland is following also what the EU countries are implementing, which is a very good thing. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yes, indeed, many European countries have responded with really compassion and solidarity to this humanitarian crisis and to welcoming refugees. And fortunately, this would be universally applied to all human beings in search for a shelter. I wanted to ask you last, before maybe departing or taking some comments. You are aware that there is a very important exercise that tries to involve citizens across European Union in the debate about the future of Europe and European Union, Conference on the Future of Europe. In fact, Petros Fasoulas, our Secretary General, is at the moment at the conference plenary in Strasbourg, and many of the European movement members also have representatives in this plenary. You are not part of the process, so to say, but I'm really wondering what are your thoughts and what would be your contribution? And I'm sure you have thought about this, about the future of Europe and future of European Union. Why not? The Citizens Deliberative Platform is offering a number of areas where citizens can put, and organizations can put proposals, but what in your view is the most important thing, and where do you see the room for action when it comes to the future of Europe and European Union? Andrew?
Well, we are, though some of my colleagues in the European Movement UK are actively involved in the Conference on the Future of Europe. Richard Corbett, who is the leader of the Socialist MEPs until shortly before Brexit, is I think, I'm not quite sure what his exact title is, but I think he's head of the Secretariat of the Conference on the Future of Europe and is very intimately involved. And we have had debates in the European Movement about what is going on in the conference. It's obviously we're semi-detached from it because this is a future of the European Union predominantly, which we're not a part. And we haven't decided ourselves to express views on it. We've encouraged debate on the various issues to do with further integration, institutional improvement, and so on, and policy initiatives, but we haven't expressed a view on it. And it's fair to say that there is almost zero public engagement on this issue in Britain. I suspect that hardly anyone knows that there is a conference on the future of Europe. because now that we're out of the EU, these things don't play in debate at all. I haven't seen a single reference in parliamentary debates to the Conference on the Future of Europe, and I haven't, as far as I'm aware, our government hasn't expressed any view on it whatsoever. So the debate that is taking place in Britain, though we have, as I say, got some people who are involved, is very, very limited. And we in the European movement aren't expressing views as to what should happen. But what comes out of it, of course, could play a big part in the wider debate about whether Britain ultimately gets closer to or re-enters the European Union, if it, rather like the Giscard Commission and so on, actually ends up making significant changes to the whole way that the European Union is run and its objectives.
Right. Thank you very much. Yes, Raphael, the same question for you. Is the Swiss public opinion or civil society aware about the Conference on the Future of Europe, and what are you doing on this? Anything?
Sadly, no. No public engagement at all as well, I would say. So our main goal is to raise awareness on the fact that there is something going on there in the context of the conference. We organized, for example, last November, a big European Day with guests, including from the European Parliament, to get people in Switzerland access to those that are involved in the conference. We are also glad that EMI, but also UEF, we also are, the Swiss section of UEF, are very much involved in the conference. So just trying to raise awareness on the fact that this is going on. And I support what Andrew said. It's a bit of a shame. It makes me sad that we cannot, or we don't want to actively in Switzerland, even if we are not part of the EU, discuss on which future do we want for our continent. It's our common future, so it's a bit of a tragic situation for a country that is in the middle of this project. We'll we are following it closely, and we'll try to take up on what will come out from the discussions in our events, in our magazine, in our communication, to show people that in the EU they are discussing, thinking, debating on where to go together, and we should do basically the same.
Thank you very much. Andrew, we have a question. Sorry, just wanted to see. I will try to read. For Andrew, it was what you said about the lack of interest of British for the conference, for the British citizens for the Conference on the Future of Europe. Do you believe that since Brexit, the Brits have lost interest in the common challenges that the UK and EU face together? And how do you prevent the gap from growing between European and UK civil society?
I don't think that the Brits have lost interest in the common challenges. After all, we spent the large part of this discussion talking about Ukraine, which is the biggest common challenge. They have completely lost interest in the internal operation of the European Union and the institutions, though. We have nobody in the institutions now, obviously, not in the Council of Ministers, not in the Parliament, not in the Commission. And therefore, there's no one injecting any viewpoints from those institutions into the British debate, and there's very little awareness of what is going on in those institutions either. But the issues, which are so big, will continue to dominate our debate. Not just Ukraine, but climate change, which is another big challenge facing the EU, and net zero and how that's approached, and the approach being taken by the EU at large will feature in our debates, but there is, as I say, almost zero interest in the internal discussions and arguments and operations of the European institutions. To take one example, President Zelensky when he addressed the European Parliament, I think it was last week. That got almost no coverage in Britain. When he addressed the House of Commons 2 days ago, of course, that was massive media attention, even though he said exactly the same thing to both gatherings. He put a direct reference to Shakespeare, and he indirectly quoted Winston Churchill, who of course was the founder of the European movement in Britain, in his speech to the House of Commons. But his call for strong military and moral and diplomatic support from a united Europe behind Ukraine was the same in both cases. And it was very striking that when he did it in the form of an address to the House of Commons, it led our news and dominated our political coverage for that day. But when he did exactly the same to the European Parliament, it had no attention whatsoever.
That's very interesting. Almost that's very interesting. Thank you. Yeah, because regardless of the relationship between UK and EU, having in mind the importance of address of the Ukrainian president to the parliament of the biggest international organization, so to say, it's interesting that there is no information about it, no coverage, almost like it's on purpose. Sorry, that's just one comment that maybe depicts some of them lack of information about the EU that maybe is existing in the UK. Raphael, I just wanted to ask you for the end, being part of the networks like this, like European Movement International, you mentioned, and Federalists Network, WEF, how are you being able to be also, and are you using this to be able also to participate in the wider European discussions and debates, even in the countries outside the EU?
Yeah, thanks for the question. No, it's for myself and for our movement. It's a very big part to know that we are part of these bigger European families. It was very difficult these past 2 years with COVID and without the possibility to travel that easily to feel concretely that we are not alone in Switzerland. We are part of a bigger thing. So in this regard, I'm really glad that we can count on the support of our UEF EMI family members. It's a precious network that allows us to get in touch also with realities that are not that different from ours. And today's a good example with the UK, but also to get access to the discussions that are going on in the EU on the European level. I'm also in the executive bureau of UEF, so there with a few MEPs, Sandro Gozzi being one. I can bring back in Switzerland in my activities these European perspectives and know concretely what are the thoughts, the challenges the people are facing there. Information that I not able so easily to get through the media or people in Switzerland. So that's a big thing for us. I regret that even within our members there is not maybe not anymore or not enough understanding of these levels being EMI, UEF. It's always a challenge to motivate people to get also involved in their activities. But it's an amazing, a great part of my job, my engagement, to get involved with all these peoples and share experiences and feel this this togetherness, which I believe being fundamental in our world, new world, our days.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much. We don't have any more comments. I don't know if you want to say something for the end, but if not, I would like to thank you, Andrew and Raphael, very much for your participation in the discussion today. It was really my pleasure. I hope it's really an opportunity also to congratulate you on all your work that you're doing in your countries, in the European movement and beyond. And thank you for that as well. It's really our honor to have you with us. And to cooperate with you. Thank you very much to all of the people who have joined us today on this nice, sunny but cold day in Brussels and outside Brussels. It's really something we will continue to do with our activists and stakeholders across the network. We have a very diversified network, and really we want to show what is going on in each of these countries and societies. You will be able to rewatch the European chats if you are not able to watch it now, and have a very good rest of the day. Goodbye.